presentation on the solid waste public-private partnerships. This morning, we're going to have a presentation about proposed legislation to simultaneously support local solid waste businesses and work toward achieving the goals in our regional waste plan. As we discussed in a special workshop earlier this year, public-private partnerships can give us the opportunity to improve service for residents, improve efficiency, and support the local economy. I want to thank Councillor Simpson for making this topic a priority. But for the presentation, I'll turn it over to Brian Kennedy, our Chief Financial Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President Peterson. Metro Councilors, Brian Kennedy, use he, him pronouns, Chief Financial Officer here at Metro. I have a brief presentation walking through what we think this could accomplish and clarifying the direction to staff. Let's go to the next slide. So just to reorient everyone, I have a P3 definition here that is a technical definition. The things that are important. So a public-private partnership is long-term. So, generally at least 15 years, sometimes longer, depending on the asset. Risk adjusted, meaning risk in the project is shared between the public and private sector. It's performance-based. So the contractual arrangements we end up with have performance-based incentives. And finally, it's a contractual relationship between that public entity and private entity. Important clarification is a public-private partnership is a form of delivery, project delivery. So it is, there are a lot of things it's not, but basically we're talking about an alternative to a traditional design build project in construction or a traditional kind of procurement. Let's go to the next slide, please. So P3s are not funding solutions. They don't bring money to the table in general. They're not right for every project. And we'll talk a little bit about what are the criteria where they are right. It's not a vehicle to transfer all risks to the private sector. And then it's also not a privatization of public assets. And not that, any of those things in a particular situation are bad things. Privatization may make sense in some contexts, but a public-private partnership is not designed to achieve that goal. Next slide, please. So why do we do P3s? One reason is reducing public sector risk. By engaging in these contracts, we are able to balance risk between the public sector and private sector, particularly in construction projects or long-term operational agreements. You can structure those contracts where it is more balanced and you're able to move some of that risk from landing entirely on the public sector. These contracts do typically include pay for performance, and which isn't to say that you can't do performance-based contracting in other contexts, but it's an essential element of public-private partnerships. And then finally, one of the major reasons to do it is fiscal planning certainty. So these contracts kind of limit the exposure of the public sector and make clear what the public sector's obligation is to deliver these projects. Next slide, please. So this resolution, this is my fault. I got the draft resolution to the Metro Attorney late, so they are just getting us feedback. So I think you'll see some revisions prior to the version that comes forward for consideration. But at a high level, what it's trying to do is, number one, direct staff to create a P3 framework. And I'll talk a little bit more about what this is, but basically lay out the high-level process for how Metro would consider public-private partnerships and providing clarity both to staff and potential private sector partners. It also would direct staff to develop a report evaluating P3 options in the solid waste system. So a comprehensive look at our role in the solid waste system and how those public-private partnerships might play a role. And then also a suitability analysis for short-term opportunities in the solid waste system. We think there are probably some things that could move more quickly, and so we want to get those in front of council on as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. So in terms of the P3 framework, what we want to do is first for this look at the solid waste system, but for Metro generally, identify what are the criteria for project screening? What are the things we might look at that suggest that projects might be viable candidates for public-private partnerships? So lay those out so there is transparency for staff, but also for potential partners. Define the types of procurement processes we would use for these sorts of partnerships. And then also be clear about the guidelines and recommendations for use of advisors. One thing that's pretty consistent across organizations that do public-private partnerships is they have a kind of clear guidelines around when they bring in specialized legal advice for P3s, as well as kind of a whole full spectrum of technical advisors, including financial, engineering, geotechnical, it really depends on the type of project who you want to bring in. Next slide, please. So why we're looking at this for the solid waste system, and this goes to some of those screening criteria that we would use in the P3 framework. So in the solid waste system, we have an existing predictable waste stream, predictable revenue stream, waste stream. So that is a mechanism that's really important for making these projects happen. That's where, potentially the source of public funding for these projects comes from. This is also an area where there's a lot of private sector expertise. This ties into the third bullet, the opportunities for innovation. So one of the main reasons for do this is bringing in the private sector and places where they have done innovation and leveraging that for our projects. And then finally, one of the other reasons the solid waste system is a good fit is asset life. So longer lived assets tend to be better candidates for these sorts of projects because you have a longer period of time over which to kind of recover that capital investment and generate efficiencies from operations. Next slide, please. So in terms of the timeline, the resolution directs staff to come back to council with this P3 framework in September. And then that preliminary P3 opportunities by November of 2025, and then the full P3 report for the solid waste system by March of 2026. So we think that framework is important to set out the guidelines for how we're going to do this, bring short-term opportunities to council quickly, and then the full report later in the fiscal year. And that is my last slide, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councilor Simpson, do you have anything to add, being part of the initial push on this legislation?
Yes, and apologies, y'all, I was a little late. Thank you, Brian, for this presentation. I think you outlined exactly why this is important. We have an opportunity to support our own charge in reducing waste in the waste stream, but then also support businesses who have that expertise or who would like to move down the path of innovation. And we are great partners and we're good for that. And so thank you, one, for the many drafts. And I'm sure once Carrie gets the final, there'll be another draft and revisions that you've gone through in getting us here. And I'm happy to discuss with my colleagues. Thank you.
Awesome. Councilors, any questions? Councilor Rosenthal and then Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first of all, a question for Brian. Is there a magic in the number? You said it was usually 15 years. I can imagine, for example, projects for solid for the waste that it might be trying a new kind of facility for 10 years or 5 years. I mean, is it restricted, or is there a magic in the 15-year number? I mean, I understand why it's longer rather than shorter. That's one question. And I support, I think it's important, as Councilor Simpson said, I think it's important that we move forward because that's a big portion, and it's also what we heard from a lot of our solid waste providers. My other concern is in reading the resolution, I had concern that WPES was going to be responsible for developing a prototype for the rest of the agency. And I would just point out that their relationship to the private sector is rather unique because they not only deal with the private sector, they actually license and franchise and regulate the private sector. So I suspect that what they develop for their use is going to be quite a bit different from what we might have a P3 kind of protocols for parks, or whether it's for Expo or things like that. So I would just raise that issue. But the question is, Would this be applicable to, say, 5-year pilot projects?
Councilor Rosenthal, that's an excellent question. There's no magic in the number. Generally, the larger the investment, the longer time frame you want to see, and it's really dependent upon the particular type of asset you're looking at. For instance, a lot of significant public-private partnerships in the transportation system, they may have 50-year contracts because those are very long-lived assets. So it really is dependent. I think the guideline is, these are probably not going to work if you're looking at 1 or 2 years. It's generally a longer-term relationship. And I think to your second question, we view this direction to staff as direction to all Metro staff, not just WPES. So the framework will be developed by finance and the COO's office, and to be broad enough to apply to all Metro departments, because I think there are opportunities for P3s and other parts of the agency as well. So we want to make sure that we have that general framework that works for the whole agency, and then WPES, the resolution has specific direction to them about the types of projects to look at and guidance for that more detailed report.
Isn't that, just a follow-up, isn't that the responsibility for generalizing what they come up with really the responsibility of GAPD?
Not necessarily. I think this isn't interdisciplinary work. They probably have a role, but I think it's probably more appropriate between finance, COO's office, capital asset management. This is more, I would describe as technical project delivery work, and less about politics and policy.
Okay, you know my position on this.
Okay, Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. I think this is a really interesting conversation, in particular because of the different parts of our agency and how, to some extent, our enterprise funds have always been pretty rooted in being competitive and being in the market. And then we have other parts of our agency that have more protections, and some would say almost a monopoly on delivery of service. When I think about the evolution of how we've gotten to public-private partnerships, it started out not here at Metro, but largely in the field of government and philosophy around delivery of service. It started out as contracting, then we moved to public-private partnerships, and I think most recently what has emerged is moving beyond partnership to collaboration. And what that speaks to is really sharing the power with folks who are often simply vendors or simply delivering something that we are buying. And I think it is moving towards respecting their expertise and respecting the risk that they take well beyond just being a vendor. So really want to underscore that I want to move us towards collaboration. And I think there's a lot of interesting academic literature over the past decade that shows where P3s have tried to be structured with a lot of money up front and then they fizzle at the end. And we're in this for the long term. So really appreciate hearing your 50-year time horizon, and want to make sure that if we are going to take seriously a framework, that we make it durable and not just of this moment. Thank you.
Wise words. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Wong.
Yep, thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Councilor Simpson, for shepherding this, and Brian for working on the framework. I've seen the resolution that there's multiple milestones, and I was just wondering what was kind of driving the timing of those milestones. But one goes up to March 31st of next year, 2026. And it seems like a pretty ambitious timeline. So just, thoughts on that. And then also on the preliminary report, it seems like there's a wide range of outreach that needs to happen along with that, which can also be time consuming, but also wanting to make sure, since you're the CFO and all, did we budget for that appropriately? in our fiscal year budget. Just because I know having all these conversations and consultants can add up pretty quick.
Councilor Wong, great questions. I think in terms of the preliminary report, one of the thoughts there are some opportunities in WPES that are going to present themselves in a relatively short horizon. And so we want to make sure that we have some space to have those conversations and recognize that those are very preliminary conversations. We're not anticipating that we would be at the phase where we're doing kind of significant technical analysis, but it's really making sure we're looking at, are these potential viable candidates in order to, it's kind of a system of gates. So that first check of, should we look at it? And then if we do, then we start engaging advisors and doing additional work. So I think to your second question about the budget, I don't think this initial work necessarily has a significant budgetary impact. This should be work that staff is capable of doing ourselves. And it's really at that next phase where we identify projects that have potential, that then we bring in technical advisors to think about how we do that. And a lot of those projects, we would be bringing in technical advisors no matter the project delivery method we choose. If it's a capital project and we're doing a traditional design bid build, we're going to be bringing in architects and engineers in the process. If we decide to deliver it using a P3 approach, then we still have technical advisors, just in a little bit of a different format. So this is not something that in and of itself should cost the agency more. And I think we have flexibility within our budget to do this work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, we look forward to seeing this on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work on it, Brian.
Of course.
All right, we'll move on to council direction on the 2028-2030 Regional Flexible Fund allocation. The Regional Flexible Fund team kicked off this allocation in February 2024, but they have been exceptionally busy the last several months, completing the technical evaluations, developing scenarios, engaging the community. After a productive presentation at JPAC earlier this month, the team is here to present updates on the two-step process, including bonded capital projects and allocation for local transportation projects ahead of returning to council in July for requested action. So we have Jean and Grace here. Good morning.
Good morning. Great. Well, thank you, members of council, for having me here today. My name is Grace Cho. I use she/her pronouns. I'm a principal transportation planner, and I'm here to share where we are, as well as a few updates on the 28 through 30 Regional Flexible Fund allocation for both the bond proposal as well as the step 2 allocation. I have quite a bit to cover, so I'll just get started. Next slide, please. So just a short refresher, the regional flexible funds are federal transportation dollars, which the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, for this region that happens to be Metro, has the authority to allocate. They're comprised solely of federal surface transportation funds, primarily the Surface Transportation Block Grant, as well as the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality funds. In total, they make up about 5% of all the transportation funding in the region. And as a source of funds, they're one of the region's tools to implement our regional transportation plan. Next slide, please. So I imagine the next question would be, well, how much do we have in terms of the regional flexible funds? Well, I have some good news to share as part of some updates. Metro staff's most recent estimate of regional flexible funds available for the 2028 through 2030 cycle has increased from our initial projection of about $150 million last spring up to $161 million. This increase is due to the difference between what was initially estimated in regional flexible fund revenues and then what we're actually seeing in terms of actuals in regional flexible funds to result through the annual appropriations process. Through that reconciliation process, an estimated 6 million of additional unallocated carryover of regional flexible funds became available starting essentially now. And in addition to that, Metro staff updated our regional flexible funds revenue forecast to the most recent appropriation, particularly for our congestion mitigation and air quality funds. And we were able to actually update and build out our projected revenue estimates moving forward with those levels. And that has resulted in an additional $4.5 million in regional flexible funds to be able to allocate in this cycle. Next slide, please. So the region allocates regional flexible funds in 3-year cycles. To kick off each cycle, the region adopts a program direction which outlines the region's intent on how to expend regional flexible funds in a manner that advances our regional objectives. In July 2024, in coordination with JPAC and TPAC, Metro Council adopted Resolution 245415, the program direction for the 2028 through 2030 Regional Flexible Fund allocation, which specified an allocation framework, desired outcomes, and process objectives. Next slide, please. The allocation structure of the regional flexible funds in that program direction includes 4 parts. First, there is a Step 1A, which is an allocation of flexible funds to repay debt service on previous project bond commitments. Then there's Step 1B, which is an allocation of flexible funds to continue region-wide programs, such as the Regional Travel Options Program, and planning activities, such as our corridor planning work. Next, there is the Step 2 allocation, which typically represents the remainder of regional flexible funds following the allocations of Step 1A and Step 1B. Step 2 is a competitive allocation for local transportation projects on the regional transportation system. And then somewhat unique to this cycle, we actually have a 4th category called what we're calling Step 1A.1. As part of the adopted program direction, the region agreed to move forward in developing a new project bond proposal for consideration by decision makers. This 4th category entails 2 parts. The first is the decision to bond regional flexible funds, and the second is which projects to allocate bond proceeds to. And the new project bond proposal and the Step 2 allocation are the focus of today's updates. Next slide, please. As alluded, this cycle's regional flexible fund has a 4th allocation category. The bonding of regional flexible funds isn't necessarily new to this region, but it is worthwhile to remind us as to why the region would consider another capital project bonding commitment with regional flexible funds. So first and foremost, bonding is a financing mechanism to build transportation projects sooner. And the benefits to build sooner are many, but in particular for this council, it's really seeing through council's commitments to make meaningful progress on the adopted 2023 Regional Transportation Plan priorities of safe system, equitable transportation, climate action and resilience, mobility options, and thriving economy, becoming real for the people who live, work, visit, and play in our metropolitan region. Another reason for bonding is that there is the consideration of the funding leverage opportunities that are available at the state and federal level that by bonding regional flexible funds, that can really help to unlock. The region has a really strong history and success in strategically bonding regional flexible funds as a contribution to local matching for major capital projects. Most notably, this has been done on several parts of our region's high capacity transit system. And it has better positioned those projects to go after federal discretionary grants. In total, those bonds of the previous years have actually managed to secure a little over $2.2 billion in federal grants alone for the region. And most of that can be seen through the region's MAX light rail system, as well as the region's first FX line. And then lastly, the reason for the region's previous bonds and as well as the bond proposal being discussed today is really centered around feasibility. In any given regional flexible fund cycle, it's not enough money on hand to support local matching contribution requests to the region's major capital projects without a significant trade-off, like foregoing a step 2 allocation for the cycle and possibly ending some of our regional programs, both of which actually have functions in fulfilling different regional transportation plan needs and goals. So essentially, it really comes down to being able to support those local matching contributions through a mechanism to bring some funds back sooner while also being able to balance a number of other pieces of our objectives around our allocation, our flexible fund allocation program. This year and a half long effort to get to a new bond proposal is really reflects these reasons in terms of why we would want to bond regional flexible funds again this time around. And I'll get into that in a moment. Next slide, please. So just getting into the bond proposal itself and how we actually got here. As part of the program direction, there was an adopted set of bond purpose and principles to really guide that development of the bond proposal. Some aspects I just really wanted to focus in on in terms of what's been kind of our North Star in developing this bond proposal has really been around keeping this bond proposal centered and focused on transit capital projects, while at the same time recognizing differing transit needs across our metropolitan area. Another part is that we really wanted to see the advancement of regional scale projects earlier than they would otherwise be built earlier than they otherwise would be. And then lastly, there was an aspect about making the most of retiring bond debt service starting in 2028, but at the same time wanting to maintain that we continue to have a step 2 allocation that invests into local capital projects at comparative levels from previous cycles, and also not extending our debt commitments over many future years in efforts to preserve the ability of future JPACs and Metro Council bodies, the ability to direct that spending to priority projects. These conversations really came with a lot of honest discussions about trade-offs as we were building a bond proposal, focusing in on those key purpose and principles. Some of these trade-off discussions really did include the discussion around the extension of that debt service and ultimately what that cost is going to be overall if moving forward with a bond. Also, as part of that, the agreement that the region would not seek another capital bond out of the Regional Flexible Fund for the next 4 cycles. So being the trade-off of that commitment. At the same time, there are really good points to be made and the regional tables have grappled with essentially the trade-off of the increased costs of the trade-off of the debt now versus the potential increased cost of building these projects on an extended timeline, with a particular focus on those regional scale projects that with a contribution of bond proceeds as matching funds are in a strong position to secure grants for construction in the near future. Next slide, please. So as a new process for developing a bond proposal, Metro staff designed a multi-step process with several endpoint points to help shape and inform a bond proposal package for the region to consider. The multi-step process included a nomination period where we saw 10 nominations received, an eligibility screening, which then narrowed down the candidates to 9 projects that would be eligible for the bond proceeds, excuse me. Following, there was a technical evaluation that brought us through the end of 2024, which provided the results of the candidate understanding of how well the candidates met both the bond purpose and principles, as well as help to advance our regional transportation plan objectives. Then in January, when Metro staff was last here in front of council gathering input on developing draft scenarios for the bond scenario development process, that information, in conjunction with input from our regional partners, helped to shape a bond proposal, which was then presented at JPAC at their March meeting. Shared on the right of this slide is the Step 1A.1 bond proposal, which allocates $88.5 million to invest in 5 regional scale projects, placing investments throughout the region, and once built will leverage over $500 million. At their March meeting, JPAC took action to refer the Step 1A.1 bond proposal for public comment. And at the end of March, Metro kicked off the 5-week public comment period where over the course of those 5 weeks, Metro received over 500 online comments on the bond proposal, as well as an additional 72 emailed comments, letters, and testimony combined. Next slide, please. So as the region inches closer to taking an action to commit to a new project bond, the previous way in which the Regional Flexible Fund bonds were executed will be a little different this time around. The main difference stemming from Metro or a delegated agency taking on the role as the bonding entity. So it feels worthwhile to take a little time to explain the difference in roles of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, and Metro as a public agency will play in the implementation in this Regional Flexible Fund bond. So just briefly starting with the MPO serves as the decision-making body to award regional flexible funds to projects and programs. Essentially, the MPO dictates how to use regional flexible funds. This includes the decision to bond regional flexible funds for advancing revenues and committing to long-term debt servicing. This is a shared decision function between JPAC and Metro Council. Then there's the role of Metro, or a possible delegated agency, where they'll be in the role as the bonding entity to facilitate the Regional Flexible Fund bond. The bonding entity will hold the decision-making function over bond actions, such as when to issue bonds, entering into any necessary fund exchanges, and ultimately hold the administrative responsibilities as well as the financial liability. It is not Metro or the delegated agency's purview as the bonding entity to make decisions on how to use Regional Flexible Fund bond proceeds or to reallocate the bonds. The allocation, award, and decision is within the purview of the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Next slide, please. So this month, as Metro staff have shared updates on the Step 1A.1 bond proposal at TPAC, JPAC, and at coordinating committees, and we've gathered any last questions ahead of next month's requested actions. The input that we've really been receiving in general has been focused on understanding some of those final numbers and timeline of the new debt service being taken on, and ultimately, what are those next steps following the action to move forward with a new project bond, which I'll speak to briefly later in this presentation. I'm just going to pause for a moment here because I'm going to say next slide. And next slide will be actually a transition over into discussing the Step 2 process, but I want to give a moment in case there was any desire to ask any questions in regards to the material presented on the bond. All right, well, catch that at the end. So the next slide, please. So now that I've gone through some of those bond updates, let's transition over into Step 2. As a brief reminder, the desired outcome for the competitive Step 2 allocation process is to make progress towards the goals defined in the 2023 Regional Transportation Plan and to meet the objectives set forth this allocation cycle as adopted in the program direction. So how we're doing that is by developing a Step 2 allocation package, which incorporates and balances across 5 components reflective of the desired outcomes. These include the program direction objectives, the technical evaluation results of the submitted application, public comment on the applications, input and direction on concepts to build different Step 2 package options, And then lastly, indication of the coordinating committees and the City of Portland's priority application or applications if electing to identify. Next slide, please. Similar to the bond proposal development process, the step 2 allocation process included a call for projects that ran from September through November of last year, which I just want to note that through the adoption of Metro Council adoption of Resolution 2454-14, that action made redistribution funding available so that we could actually provide additional support for the first time to smaller jurisdictions in putting together their step 2 applications. Following the call for projects, a technical evaluation was undertaken on the 24 application received. The technical evaluation entailed 2 parts, one which assessed for how well those applications advances the regional transportation plan goals and policy objectives, and the second as to how well those projects, proposed projects, are equipped and prepared into entering the federal aid project delivery process. Once the results of the 2 evaluations were shared, this led to all 24 applications being put forward into the public comment, where over 5 weeks, Metro received about 1,700 comments on the 24 candidate projects through an online survey, as well as emailed comments, letters, and public testimony combined. Based on the technical evaluation results, the public comment, as well as gathering feedback and input from TPAC and JPAC in May regarding any other conditions or factors to incorporate as part of developing a step 2 allocation package, we're at a stage where we can share 3 initial step 2 allocation package options. Next slide, please. Again, the 3 different step 2 allocation package options incorporates 4 out of our 5 main components in building a step 2 package. I just want to note that these package options do not include the coordinating committee or the City of Portland's priorities identified, because those were submitted following, this month and beyond some of the committee deadlines to date. So in applying these components to help inform these allocation package options, an assessment rubric was developed defining different criteria to organize and understand how well each step 2 application meets the components to build that step 2 allocation package. And I believe all of those materials were included as part of the work session materials today. Next slide, please. So I'll walk through briefly each of the step 2 allocation package options. So starting with the first, coming in at a total of about $47.8 million. Allocation package option 1 emphasizes high performance across the 4 components with some additional focus on the overall technical evaluation score. The 9 projects being proposed as part of this allocation package scored within the top half of the technical evaluation. In addition, those 9 projects meet more than half of our program direction objectives, as well as they meet a number of the considerations brought forward in discussions with TPAC and JPAC in May. And then lastly, I just want to note option 1 is most closely aligned with input that we heard from TPAC and JPAC members in May to respect the outcomes of the technical evaluation results. Next slide, please. The second allocation package option comes in a little under $49 million, and it emphasizes high performance, again, in that technical evaluation, as well as it meets a number of the program direction objectives while taking into consideration JPAC input. In particular, option 2 includes the step 2 applications that complement recently built, currently active, or projects that are being considered as part of the step 1A.1 bond proposal. Next slide, please. And then lastly, the third package option continues to emphasize high performance in the technical evaluation, meets a number of the program direction objectives, and the other considerations that were brought forward by TPAC and JPAC in May. What differentiates option 3 ever so slightly is the nod to public comment by including the highest rated step 2 application that also performed highly in our technical evaluation and meets a number of our program direction objectives. I just want to note that of the 3 allocation package options, option 3 is the only one to come in a little over $49 million, which I guess I should have specified earlier is the amount we have available to allocate in step 2. Next slide, please. So as mentioned in June, Metro shared these same 3 step 2 allocation package options at the June 6th TPAC meeting, as well as the subsequent coordinating committees the week of June 9th. The coordinating committee presentations were by request. The discussions on the 3 step 2 allocation package options and the input that was received or being carried forward to JPAC are being shared here on this slide. I just want to note that from what we heard, different audiences had different preferences for the allocation package options and provided comments as to what a staff recommended option would need to adjust in order to make it palatable for that specific audience. So while there isn't necessarily consensus on a specific option that was presented, based off of the input and direction that we received, Metro staff believes we're not too far from getting to a step 2 allocation package that incorporates all the feedback. In addition to gathering some input around those allocation package options, there are some further comments in regards to a desire to see a more holistic approach in our allocation process between the bond proposal development as well as step 2, as both were running somewhat in parallel to each other, as well as questions about the updated revenue estimates decision process, and then the application of the different components in building these different step 2 allocation package options. Next slide, please. So I want to note, since kicking off the 28 through 30 Regional Flexible Fund allocation in February of 2024, Metro staff have made it a priority to ensure that we're talking to our regional partners throughout both the bond proposal development and the step 2 process regularly. Keeping them well informed, trying to answer any questions, and giving plenty of opportunity to provide input into shaping each piece of the allocation. Over this year and a half, TPAC has seen myself or a member of the Regional Flexible Fund team monthly, whereas with JPAC in 2024, we are on the agenda roughly every other month. And then in 2025, I may be the most frequent attendee at the JPAC table aside from the JPAC members themselves. So
very true.
What I want to just note here is not shown is that on this slide, touch points with Metro Council. Since kicking off, Metro Council we have engaged the council at 4 different points to take inputs ahead of key actions, which includes today. Next slide, please. Further, just emphasizing here that beyond just the Metro hosted TPAC and JPAC tables, the Regional Flexible Fund staff have also gone to a number of coordinating committees as well as advisory committees as requested. This slide is just further emphasizing the number of touch points we've had with our regional partners in shaping both this bond proposal and the development of our step 2 allocation package. Next slide, please. So now that I've shared various updates, just a short overview of the next steps for both processes, starting with step 1A with our bond proposal. Throughout June, Metro staff have shared updates about the updated revenue estimates and the bond proposal at regional committees, and now we're here at today's work session. Any input that we're receiving this month is really helping to direct staff in what we need to focus on addressing before we return next month in requesting action. For the step 2 process, Metro staff shared some of the same allocation package options at TPAC and coordinating committees, gathering input, also wanting to leave space for any input that council would like to provide today. The aim is to incorporate this information to revise and to provide some revised options for consideration at the June 26th JPAC meeting. Ultimately, that input received between TPAC, the Coordinating Committee's council today, as well as the June 26th JPAC meeting, will give staff direction in shaping that staff recommended step 2 allocation package that we'll bring forward in, next slide, please. In July, where in July, staff will come back with 2 separate resolutions seeking action from TPAC and JPAC to approve and recommend adoption. And the scheduled Metro Council action to adopt both of those resolutions to encompass the full 28 through 30 regional flexible fund allocation is scheduled for the 31st. Next slide, please. And then going back to what I had mentioned previously, following July's action, that's where the real work of this begins. From the standpoint of the Regional Flexible Fund bond, there'll be a number of steps, including securing fund exchanges, defining the details of how to issue the bonds, and executing intergovernmental agreements with the bond proceed recipients. That will need to happen following July's action. For the step 2 allocation, the next steps will include incorporating the projects into the programming of the 2027 through 2030 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program and beginning kickoff meetings to work through the details with the awarded agencies on their updating their project schedules, their budget by phase, and also being able to provide a little bit of support through the Metro Council resolution action I had referenced earlier in regards to the redistribution funds, being able to support getting some of those step 2 projects through to their IGA agreements with ODOT. Next slide, please. So I have just one discussion question today, and that is, what additional information does the council need before staff brings forward an action next month? And with that, I leave it here.
Council. Any additional information? Councilor Wong.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Grace and the team for all the work, and to my colleagues on JPACT. This is really exciting stuff. And I think in this time of uncertainty, I'm just wondering how you're approaching, the uncertainty. So if we're bonding for specific projects and any of those projects that, we might reconsider or don't advance later on, what then happens to that bonded money? Does it get reapportioned, or when we write the bond, is it this money goes to this specific project, or are we generating a more general pot of funding?
The way that the legislation is being laid out as part of the bond proposal resolution, and I believe a draft of those materials are included as part of today's work session material, it'd be under Exhibit A and Exhibit B, is to allocate a set amount of bond proceeds to each individual project, and then Exhibit B laying out a set of conditions of approval for the bond itself. There are conditions within the bond that aim to address that the action being made and being taken upon by JPACT and the council is for a package of projects instead of a series of actions on individual projects. So the 5 projects, if say under some circumstances that were unknown and unfamiliar to us, ends up affecting 3 of the candidate projects and they're unable to move forward, this would be a decision that we would want to return back to JPACT and the Metro Council for discussion, again, under that purview of the decision around how to use bond proceeds being under the MPO, to discuss how to address that that issue that maybe 3 projects aren't moving forward, and then maybe there's a question as to whether to reallocate those bond proceeds, or depending on the nature of how we ended up structuring the bond issuance, whether we go out and issue those bonds in general. So so I'm hoping that the simple answer is that we're trying to address some of the uncertainties as it relates to the bond through our legislative, the legislation as part of the bond proposal package. Just noting that in particular, this is a package that's being approved upon and not necessarily by individual projects.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is if any of these projects change, it would come back to JPAC Metro Council.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the simple answer. They're even simpler answer.
Thank you. And then on the bonding entity, I guess what are the pros and cons for Metro being a bonding entity? Are there other local governments or state governments that might be a stronger fit or get better interest rates?
I mean, I think that's some of the further investigatory work that we want to be able to conduct after the bond decision to allocate or to proceed with a bond and to allocate those bond proceeds. We've done some initial work to date, but there's been a lot of moving pieces, as you may be aware. That's the rationale behind wanting to leave some flexibility and openness as to who the bond entity may end up being. We did build a few assumptions around the bonding entity and like what types of bonds we would go after, but ultimately, if there's an opportunity through a different agency to get better rates to be able to support it, or if it's just somehow a different approach, then that better helps us advance getting those bond proceeds to those projects, then that might be the best way to go.
Okay. So more to come.
More to come, yeah.
And then last question, how many of our projects are kind of tied to the success of the statewide transportation package? Like, are they pretty much independent, or is there a lot of like, if we don't have a statewide transportation package, a lot of the step 2 projects might be impacted? I don't know. Like,
I want to just say I'm aware of one project having some that I'm aware of 2 projects that currently have requests in this in the legislature currently. Whether or not their success is fully tied to whether those requests are received, I think would be a question that's more appropriate directed at the project staff in terms of what their strategy might be.
For step 2, if in whatever option, if there's a project that isn't feasible because of statewide funding or whatever, that money just comes back to MPAC or JPAC and council in the same
statewide money.
fashion.
Oh, so for step 2, the allocation would direct, if a step 2 project is not able to move forward, typically the condition of approval around step 2 is to actually have them revert the regional flexible funds back to Metro to either reallocate in the next cycle, or there could be a proposed request as to how that's used. The bond is a little bit different, I would like to note. And so I would say that I just want to continue to reemphasize that the action on the bond is for a package. It's for all 5 projects being able to move forward. One project being affected would raise the need to bring that discussion back up through JPAC for consideration.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I'll chime in a little bit too. So one of the bond projects is the TV Highway Transit Project. They do have a pretty significant ask at the legislature. That's part of their financial plan. So one thing that we requested of all the project leads was to provide us with give us a financial breakdown of how you're planning to fund your project based on their current estimates. So TV Highway is one of those projects that has that request in. it's, as Grace is saying, really some of that question about the hinging of those projects on those funds really is better answered by those project, the agencies for those projects. And then as Grace is pointing out, if there's a change with any of these projects, whether it be state funding or federal funding that impacts their ability to move forward, we'll be back at JPAC to talk with them about like, how do we move this forward now? Because I think you're right to have the questions about the uncertainty. That's an environment we've been working in for the past few months with a lot of questions about what's to come. So really this action is about the package. Any decisions about the bonding would come back to all of you as Metro Council, and that's where the work after the decision really comes into play as we're continuing to collaborate with those projects on how they're expecting to move forward, what's the timing need for those funds. So there's more time before we actually make a decision to secure bonds and get those funds in place. So
Understood.
that helpful?
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Carrie, did you want to add something?
I think I will add, and if Catherine or Ted want to come up, I think that Jean just sort of hit on it. The nomenclature gets challenging, I think, because this is a bond package that's coming to you, because the idea is to bond a portion of these projects so that we can build them now. And that's sort of the method for financing. But the decision, who will be the borrower and issue the bonds and how that will be financed, comes as a second and separate process that will come after this. And so I just wanted to, if you saw sort of me leaning forward, is really to say the decision before council and JPAC right now as part of the MPO function is to determine what are the projects that you want to, that would be eligible for these bonds. And then secondly, who bonds, how are they bonded, what is that financing decision is a subsequent decision. And I just want to invite Ted if you want to clarify that at all. I didn't know if that was coming clear from what Grace and Jean were saying to council. And I think that's just an important point for council, to know that that's a second and subsequent action.
Yes, Ted Liebold, Transportation Policy Director with Metro. And that's exactly right, Carrie. It's this decision now is the MPO decision about projects eligible to receive the funds, how much we expect to contribute, and the setting aside of the funding stream of rough dollars to be able to pursue a bonding effort. And we will go through a whole process internally at Metro and potentially with other partners if we end up delegating that bonding borrower status to another agency. Those are all things that will happen over the course of the next year to 2 years in terms of determining that. How to move forward on that. And if at some point that process leads to a no bond decision or a delay in a bond decision, then you come back to the MPO boards, which is JPAC and the Metro Council, to say, here's we'll need to adjust the allocation decision to account for that.
All right, thank you. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councilor Huang, for the questions and for the discussion that we had on that. The only question, I was going to ask questions about the bonding process. The only question, I guess, and it's not a very big question I have on that, is TriMet was previously the agency that did most of the bonding, and I'm just wondering why they are dropping out, or whether that's just they're still in the mix of potential considerations. But my more general question has to do with, we have goals in the process for the RIFA process, which have to do with equity and have to do with climate resilience and climate reduction. And we know that the current administration will actually key in on words like that. And I don't know to what extent we have to clarify or claim that we are in compliance with federal regulations. I do know that in a recent case, of course, they're now threatening to recall vouchers because of such language. I'm just wondering if we are at risk by being A in general, and then by B being the bonding agency, from having some reduction in authorization or rescission of authorization for shall we say language that we've included as priorities, but which the current government does not.
So, Council President Peterson and councilors, I'll answer this question generally, and then I'm going to say I think that the specifics of each grant agreement are sort of what controls. And I think it's right for council and all local governments really to be thinking about the certainty of a federal funding. We're seeing what's happening, around the country. OMA and staff will be looking at those agreements carefully as they come to Metro. And we'll be going through our internal process. I think that's what's sort of appropriate to say at this stage.
So the question is, is there a process for that we have to certify we're in compliance with with federal rules at some point, or is this something that is not required for this particular program?
Council President Peterson and Councilor Rosenthal, yes, that's what I was referencing in terms of our review of each grant agreement. In some federal agencies, they call them terms and conditions, and other federal agencies, they call them master agreements. But that's the process that when we are awarded these funds, we go through and review the grant agreement for a myriad of issues in terms of how that affects our funding. But it's really a case-by-case basis as we see those agreements.
So we're at risk. Thank you.
Actually, Counselor, that was not the conclusion that you should draw at this point. I would hope that would not be the conclusion you drew. I just want to be clear.
Okay, that's your opinion. I don't concur.
All right. Counselor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. I am obviously on JPAC, attend C4, and have seen this or a similar presentation, I think 3 times. I don't know. Yeah. But thank you for looping us all in and for your work getting across the region with this information, because I think a lot of people get to the end of this process and throw their hands up and say, I didn't have a chance to get my project in, or I don't understand why this thing is getting pitted against that thing. And I do think that we've done our job of getting out in community, and in particular, the work that was done to get over 1,000 survey results that speak to some of these projects in step 2. I think that's pretty impressive. But I want to come back to this pot of money overall. On one of the first slides, you showed that we have just received notice that we'll get about $100 million more than we had anticipated this time last year.
10 million.
10 million. Okay. Order of magnitude. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. 100 million would have been awesome, but 10 million more. So is that a sign that we're going to continue to be up and to the right in terms of future allocations, or should we be more cautious with our bonding, that we may be at a place that we're, I mean, obviously we can't judge the economy into the future more than anybody else. But are we being cautious or ambitious with the percentage of future cycles? Because remember, it's not just this cycle, it's 3 future cycles, with how much we're putting into bond payback.
Sure. I might just start briefly and then let Ted carry this forward. But I would say that our revenue estimates for the regional flexible funds are moving into the future and projecting out into that 28-30. The best way I would describe it is mildly conservative, in the sense that it's not being ambitious or aggressive. It is trying to update according to the latest information that we know, which is where some of the where that actually helped to contribute to some of that $10 million that I've just referenced, in that we are maybe estimating kind of low on one of our funds. And so we've just brought it up just a hair, but projecting off of that. I think more than anything, since Ted has been here for many years at this point, we've just steadily kind of tracked and watched how the transportation authorizations and the formula funds have been allocated over time. And we've just really kind of watched according to that, making kind of our best judgments about some of those historical numbers, and have really based our overall allocation this cycle, as well as what we see as being able to support bonding payments with this new bond on top of some of the existing debt service we have into the future, to maintain that we can have a manageable debt service payment backed by regional flexible funds, while also being able to support both ongoing continuation of our regional programs and planning activities, and having a reasonable size step 2 program that we get to allocate from. All that to say is that I think we feel pretty good about our revenue estimating.
Good. And generally late summer or fall, we get the reallocation money. And reallocation is not a technical term.
The redistribution.
Redistribution,
fund.
yes. What order of magnitude do we normally receive for redistribution?
It can vary year to year. It's all dependent on, at the basic high level, at the national level, it's which states have actually obligated their funds for that year, and essentially ones that hadn't, whatever is left available gets redistributed across to different states. So I don't know if there's a set consistency necessarily, although maybe Ted can speak to what the trends have looked like over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's been everything from $0 to our largest one was almost $7 million in a year. For our forecast, we're pretty conservative on that. We're forecasting $1 million per year, but in the last 3 years, we've well exceeded that, which is why we had the one-time special allocation.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions? Being none. I'm sure if Councilor Gonzalez were here today, but he's not, we would be very appreciative of the work that you all have done with JPACT and the counselor's work as well to get us to this point. And I just want to state what Councilor Lewis said, and just thank you for the outreach. And being able to get that input is really important. So thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we'll see you back here when it's on
Next month.
July.
That's right. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next is an update from me on the President's Work Group on SHS. So yesterday we concluded the work group. We convened over 5 months. We met every other week, and it was a lot of commitment from a lot of people. And I just want to express my gratitude up front, not just for all of those folks, but specifically for Councilor Simpson and Lewis as liaisons for that, and Commissioner Ben West as the co-chair to that committee, and our staff, both in the council office and GAPD. It was a big lift, but I think it pushed us forward into a better space to get ready for this governance and reform work that we are about to take on ourselves, and a high level of input that we got on that. The 24 work group members included elected officials from the counties and cities, coalition business leaders representing a diverse cross-section of the region. Commissioner West was actually an amazing co-chair and actively spent a lot of time and input on how to approach each part of this work as we went along, and we'll get into the elements that we really honed in on. But he really came in good faith and partnership to achieve better outcomes, and I just want to reiterate my thanks for that. I think in the end, there are still differences of opinion on what a governance structure or reform should look like. I don't think we're going to be able to get to perfect for anybody, but I think that we all recognize that what we have is not working. And so how do we actually move to a better model and learn that we need to iterate this? I don't think that what we create over the next month, when we vote to change the governance, I don't think it'll be perfect then. But it'll be the start of something towards a betterness of decision-making and moving things quicker and faster, and actually getting decisions made. Right now, as we have all gone over the issues so many times, but just one is the fact that the Tri-County Planning Body has done a lot of work, has come up with a lot of recommendations, but there's nowhere for them to go. There's no one to pick it up. It's completely up to the counties, and it's not very public, and there's no accountability built into that framework. So that's just one example of many. So I've been providing you some updates. We've had a little bit of work, but I just wanted to bring up the slides that we have from last night. You'll recall that the work group's first two meetings laid out the groundwork for a conversation about SHS reforms. Is it slow on the uptake? Oh. We reviewed examples of homelessness response systems from regions across North America and got an overview of current SHS data landscape as we reaffirmed our shared commitment to addressing the transparency, accountability, and alignment and challenges within SHS. And then the next two meetings held in April focused more on where we are headed together, emphasizing the gravity of the moment and highlighting the need to work together across boundaries and the risk of failing if we don't. Some in the group raised the need for a deep system-wide review or an audit or evaluation, depending on what words people wanted to use, to better understand how SHS resources are being used and what needs to change. We also spent some time discussing what a healthier regional system would look like and what it would take to get there. Following that, we encouraged members to submit their best thinking on a possible regional framework, draft mission and vision statements, and propose goals with possible KPIs that they believed would support positive change. We encouraged them to work together with teams, with providers, or others in the community. In addition to sending those to Metro staff, the work group discussed their draft frameworks in small groups, focusing on areas of alignment and drafting some potential regional goals and KPIs. The work group met once in May and focused on the topic of governance. Members were also provided a presentation by Metro Auditor Evans covering the governance-focused findings and recommendations. From his most recent audit, they were also provided with a copy of the current SHS Oversight Committee's transmittal letter from the most recent annual report. Following that, we reviewed a proposed governance structure that closely resembled what was outlined in our January ordinance, which is intended to address many of those recommendations. We also extended an invitation for Multnomah County Auditor Jenny McGurk to present to the work group, which occurred last Friday. I haven't been able to see that, but I think we're trying to get that available on a link. Though Auditor McGurk had recently launched an SHS-specific audit, she focused on existing audits of the Joint Office of Homeless Services, now the Homeless Service Division, which has clear areas of overlap, given that SHS funds so much of the department's work. We spent our second to last meeting focusing on shared regional foundation for SHS, including mission, vision, goals, and KPIs. The point of this, again, is to really understand what we are trying to accomplish as a system and how we will know if it's working, and to establish shared priorities that support improved implementation and foster better collaboration and accountability among all the partners in this complex system. To that note, I think we really tried to increase the number of KPIs so they're not just fully focused on units, like a unit of bed for shelter bed or a unit of housing or a number of units of vouchers. So it's just what the level of information that we have gotten into more of what does it look like for success for somebody who is within this program, and how efficient are the dollars being spent. So it was a broad range of KPIs, and there's probably more KPIs in there than we need, but we still have some work to prioritize and figure that out as we move forward. But it's much better than where we began, with a narrowly tailored set of KPIs from the ballot measure. In the time between May 12th and the June 2nd meeting, Metro staff worked with a regional expert in SHS system data to synthesize the wide range of input received from the work group members into a final draft of a possible framework. The goal was to focus on feedback themes, priorities that seemed to surface in more than one place, and to find that common ground. While we set out to draft a vision, mission, goals, and KPIs, staff shared the guiding principles and program strategies, sort of naturally emerging from the feedback. So we felt it important to capture and report back to the group. In addition, staff included example outcomes we could use to create those discrete time-limited benchmarks to show progress towards system goals. Before the meeting, they met the program leadership from the counties for a preview and encouraged them to submit written comments in response to that draft. We are also at Commissioner Singleton's request meeting with providers to get more input on the KPIs, and maybe some priorities will come out of that. And then on June 2nd, the work group was asked to participate in 2 activities offering feedback on how well the goals and vision statement options achieve specific aims. For example, one question was rating on a scale of 1 to 5, how well each goal achieved the needs of the community. And then work group members shared the need for more work, and especially the need to engage with experts and partners in the development and refinement of that draft. Last night for the final meeting, we received some updates from staff around the 2 bodies of work we initiated: a system-wide evaluation of SHS and the regional vision framework. I also presented some more information and updates to the governance structure in response to feedback from the group and from the many conversations I've had. In particular, a greater emphasis on independent evaluation, or an IRP, an independent review panel, the attempt to get more into a culture of learning and iteration and process efficiency in our reformed governance process. I think we all heard loud and clear from the group that there's more work needed, which wasn't a surprise. I think that they would have liked to go for a year or more to get into detailed specifics, but we need to start making some decisions in order to get to those kinds of details. For instance, walking through how long would it take to make certain decisions in this new revised government structure? I think that's a good question, but I think we're going to need to make some decisions, start down that path, and then start setting up what are the types of decisions that this group will be making, and then be able to call out processes and timelines and that sort of thing, or even a charter. I did commit to having Metro staff put together some additional materials that better demonstrate some of the relationships between the different bodies, the TAC, the PAC, and the Metro Council. It was clear from the start they weren't asked to reach consensus in this group or an agreement on a final draft of the framework, but more it was intended that the broader conversation would inform our decision-making. So staff will be working to brief all of us and provide information in our work session next Tuesday to support your decisions going forward in July. As for next steps on key deliverables, the regional systems assessment requested by the group has started. We've got a consultant under contract already. And by that, I don't mean we went and contracted with somebody. They were already under contract and they have the ability to do this work. And we're going to start scoping. But what I will say here out loud that I said to the group, that scope will be created in a collaborative way with external stakeholders and the council. And my request that Marisa and I bring you that final scope, because to me, the scope is the most important thing that we can kind of kick off our new governance structure when it is put together this fall. It will set the tone for this initial step. And so going slow to go fast, I think, is appropriate with that scope. But we should expect to see a final report on a system evaluation early next year. What's also important to note is that Commissioner Singleton pointed out last night that Multnomah County, through their budget, is starting to move towards a system approach away from programmatic funding, which is part of what we all know has been an issue And Commissioner West also pointed out that the Clackamas County Commission will be looking at doing their own evaluation of their own work. So I think all of that can just inform this effort. I don't think it's duplicative. I think it's helpful to have all of these things going on and probably initiated because of the work that's going on here at Metro and at this work group to get ahead of things. So I'm really pleased at the fact that this work here has already initiated change within our partners at the county level. So we'll have, as a council, the opportunity to take a deeper dive on the regional vision framework and make some decisions around what to move forward, as well in July after some conversations with providers, like I said, and once staff integrates work group and partner feedback into the current draft. There are a lot of meeting summaries and we've captured a lot of feedback, and Drawbridge was our facilitator. And I just want to thank them for the work that they did in order to help facilitate what is a very difficult next step for SHS, moving from one state, which was a little reactive, into a more proactive. And I think that a lot of folks are happy about it, but still scared about the unknown of a new governance structure. So I don't want to diminish that anxiety that is out there about how maybe Metro works. I think that that's really where we're trying to get to, is what model do we already know is out there and it works, and it allows for raising the bar regionally while still allowing for the individuality of our jurisdictional partners to shine through. And I think that's a really tough line that we all walk every single day. So I think they're just welcome to our world. With that, any questions or any observations from Councillor Simpson and Councillor Lewis?
I would just thank everybody who came and spent so many Monday evenings with us. The packets contained a lot of information that this might have been the first time it was all in one place. In terms of both bringing together local practices and policy and program with some of the more academic or pure city evaluations. So was really happy with the work that was done to prepare us for the conversation. So thanks staff, not only from Metro, but also jurisdictions and some of our nonprofit providers and coalitions who are helpful there with the technical side. In terms of the conversation over the roughly 4 months we met, we went from a division of folks who wanted rapid change right away, nothing holding us back. They were divided from folks who in some ways are close to the work and in some ways are very far from the work, who think that current system is working and the question is just more money and stability in those funds. And I think by the end, we did actually get a little bit closer on everybody appreciating that we don't have a system and that our ecosystem is extremely fragile and we need a system and we need to get there with measured steps. So while we still have differences of opinion on should we have oversight from elected officials or from people in the field or some combination, while we might still have difference of opinion about the durability of this tax, I do think that folks came together on understanding that we don't have a system and we need a system, and no amount of money is going to buy us a system if we don't get a little bit uncomfortable and create something new.
Great. Anything else? Yeah, Nelson.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for convening this work group. It really does seem like progress has been made. And I think that's one of the great things that Metro does, is convene conversations to move the region forward. Last time I had a question about what's next and what would we bring back to broader community partners. Not everyone could be on on the president's work group, but I know there was a lot of interest amongst, partner organizations and other electeds. So what would you see as kind of a next step to do a share out or, continue to expand that coalition and build our tent sort of thing?
Yeah.
Are we ready to do that? Are there, KPIs that I think are ready to share? Just wondering what you envision to be next steps.
I think we're going to have a debrief now on kind of the whole thing. And I think I committed to making sure we do that, just what you asked. But I think moving forward on the governance structure change, we can let people know our next steps on that, because that will be a public process, public testimony. I think getting the regional framework, I think we need to consider it, whatever we do, kind of temporary. Because I do think that the policy advisory committee that we create should be taking a look at that and making some priorities and recommending some priorities to us. I don't think that we should be leaping forward ahead of them, so that there's ownership in the actual statements. I think we have a way to give something, a document to them to start. And I think we should adopt it as a document to give them, but I don't think we should accept it as like the final, because some priorities will need to be made. That would be my take right now, is that we do need to take all of this input and give it to them as a first step in order to create a sense of belonging in that group and create the teamwork that needs to be created. But I think we've got a great start for them with this work, with the vision statement. Just getting beyond the words, which now I can't even come to, rare, brief, and non-recurring. Important words, but what does that mean to the person outside of this room? And what does that actually mean for the success of a person? I know they're federally required words, and I know that the intent behind them is important, but that's not very specific in terms of KPIs and what that means to the public. And so I think the mission statements that we're zoning in on are more descriptive of what we're trying to achieve, but they still don't have necessarily priorities behind them, because we have a large group of people who are still not getting services. And what does that look like? Are we going to have to start prioritizing populations? I think that's a really big question for the Policy Advisory Committee that's going to have to tackle. And how does that come out of a vision and mission statement? So.
And do we envision the Policy Advisory Committee being stood up in the short to midterm?
Well, my goal would be to at least get it kicked off in September. And I know that there's a little bit of question about, can we get it going that fast? But they are going to have a lot of work just like doing a charter in the first couple meetings. So I think that while there's a lot of content here, and I know we're not maybe totally ready to dig into that content, it would be nice to get it going as soon as possible, because that president's work group really didn't want to end. They want to see things keep moving forward. And I think we do as well. So
yeah, I just feel like it's a natural point to do some broader updates and then launch into the next advisory group. But thank you.
And launch into another phase. Yep. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate the briefing and appreciate the work that's gone into picking apart what the strengths of the original governance model were and what the weaknesses were. I'm interested in, and if there's written documents that I could be referred to, that's fine. But carrying along the conversation you just had about establishing a vision, because it's my personal conclusion listening to community leaders and neighborhood leaders around District 5, that we don't have one that is understood by the public. I think our recent polling information confirms that. And particularly, I have some concerns that at least a third of people that were surveyed don't believe we're delivering what the program should. Because I think people had a notion in their head about what the original measure was intended to do. But I don't think the implementers had a common understanding
Agreed.
of what they were doing. And by that, I mean the counties and the providers and the advocates for people living outdoors. So I'm very interested in how that moves forward. And I'm also interested in Metro Council's role in that. I mean, I think we need to establish a vision, a target more.
Yeah, I was
of
gonna,
what will be accomplished in this program, that a provider has the same image as a county health department, as a nonprofit organization, as Sally Voter on the street corner if you do a pop-up interview. When does that happen, and how does the Metro Council engage with that?
that's the next step for us in July, is to start talking about that, bringing those, but we can give you the document.
By next month?
That's right. I'm looking for confirmation. July. I need more than just a little nod. I need a big nod. Okay. I think we had it scheduled for July for the governance reform.
So
we can-
governance reform doesn't answer what I'm looking for.
No, I know, just,
Okay.
but I think we can get you the documentation from the
Right.
work group now and show you what they were thinking. There's the full range of what people believe the vision should look like. And there was maybe one or two people on the group that represented kind of what you've been asking for, which is all, I'm just going to make something up, but along the lines of all people off the street by a target. And then there was folks that wanted rare, brief, and non-recurring.
Wanted what?
Rare, brief, and not reoccurring.
Okay.
And so I think where we're landing on a vision statement is more general than what you've been advocating for, less, but more specific than rare, brief, and non-recurring. And where we're getting into the specifics is more the KPIs. So there's a generalization and a hierarchy to things. So I'll be interested in your response to the actual kind of top mission statements that came out of it. There's not one that has been forwarded yet.
There's a draft vision statement I see here, or a framework. Is that a process? Or
We
is it the
discussed it,
start
and
of a vision statement?
it's the start of it.
Okay.
We have a couple statements that can probably take elements of each one and start to craft a full mission statement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
There's one that got the highest ranking by a little bit. But they're all more specific to me than rare, brief, and non-recurring, but less specific than what you've been asking for.
Okay. That's intriguing.
I think it's just more centered on the person and what we're trying to achieve than those words that don't have any specificity. So, all right. Anything else? Yeah, Counselor.
Well, we're talking about how this work group has gone. I also want to be a little bit provocative with the reality that we're living in, which is that I think this summer and fall, we're going to see many, many more people come into homelessness. There's going to be an increase in eviction. It's a culmination of where this economic moment is, combined with where the tea leaves are for some of these programs getting funded or not at the state level. And if eviction prevention is not funded at the state level, we will be holding the bag, the 3 counties and Metro. And while many of the folks who are going to be most touched or strained may already touch our system, it will also be many, many, many people who we've never interacted with in the homeless services world. And so they might naturally be population B, they might naturally not be population B, but they're definitely not population A. And I'd like us to get ahead of this and have a conversation with the 3 counties about our shared philosophy about meeting the moment with these funds, not to have a total distraction from the really important work that should be the gravitational focus of these funds, population A. But if we go 3 different ways in meeting eviction prevention with these funds, or even with other very scarce funds in some of these counties, I think it's going to create more noise and less focus. So my hope would be that we can work with our 3 county partners this summer so that we're not looking back wishing we had had a proactive approach.
Good point. Thank you. All right. With that, we will move on. And we're going to adjourn out of the work session and adjourn into a council meeting. So I will call to order the Metro Council business meeting. Georgia, do we need to call the roll? No, we don't need to do that. All right. With that, we will move into public communication on non-agenda items. Georgia, will you please describe to the audience our procedures that we will use for public communication?
If you are testifying on Zoom or by phone, please sign up by using the raise hand function in the reactions or more menus, or by dialing *9. If you are testifying in person, please come up to the front and sign up by filling out a blue card in the back of the room and bringing it up to me. When it is your turn to testify, I'll call your name or phone number. For those on Zoom, click accept to be promoted to a panelist. Your Zoom window will close briefly before you rejoin as a panelist. You can turn on your camera if you'd like. Testimony is limited to 3 minutes, and the timer begins when you begin speaking. If you are testifying in person, their timer is located at your testimony table on the wall and on the digital screen. Please state your name for the record before testifying. You do not need to give your physical address. And Council President Peterson, we have no one who has signed up to testify in advance. And I am not seeing anyone coming forward, and I have not seen any hands raised in the virtual audience.
All right, seeing no hands raised and no one running forward, we will close public testimony on non-agenda items and move on to ordinance, which is a first reading and public hearing of ordinance number 25-1531 for the purpose of indexing the supportive housing services personal income tax exemption amounts for tax years 2026 and 2030, adjusting estimated payment requirements. We have this one ordinance before us today, and we will hear public comment after we get a staff presentation and discuss the proposed ordinance after that to respond to residents and stakeholders' concerns about how inflation and economic uncertainty impact the administration of Metro supportive housing services. So to take us through the staff presentation, we have Josh and Justin. Welcome.
Thank you, President Peterson. Council, my name is Josh Harwood. I'm your Revenue and Analytics Division Director here at Metro. I'm here with Justin Lobsher, our Tax Compliance Program Manager, to talk about two small changes to SHS tax administration. These are things that we've talked about for quite a while around a lot of our SHS discussions. We're bringing these forward today in order to get them in place for the 2026 tax year. So we want to make sure that we're able to communicate that to everybody and move forward with these small changes. Justin will briefly describe them, and then I will give you some contextual prompts in terms of our contextual information in terms of impacts. So with that, I'll turn it over to Justin.
Thank you, Josh. Good morning. Thank you, President Peterson and councilors. Again, my name is Justin Lobsher, Tax Compliance Program Manager. We can go to the next slide, please. This ordinance proposes 2 essential updates to Metro's SHS income tax structure. 1, indexing personal income exemption thresholds for inflation. And 2, updating the estimated tax payment requirement. These changes will ensure that the SHS tax remains focused on high income earners as originally intended by Measure 26210, while also responding to community and tax preparer concerns around estimated payment confusion and administrative burden. Next slide, please. The first update proposes indexing SHS income exemption threshold levels for inflation. The SHS personal income tax was designed to apply only to high earning households. However, since its adoption in 2020, inflation has pushed more households over the income threshold, even when the real purchasing power has not increased. By indexing the income exemption threshold to inflation, Metro honors the original intent of the tax, protects taxpayers whose real incomes haven't grown, and ensures SHS revenues remain progressive and fair. This simple annual adjustment tied to cost of living increases is a best practice in tax policy and reflects the council's responsiveness to community input. Indexing protects taxpayers from bracket creep, where inflation alone can push some middle income earners into a tax originally designed for high income households. Metro will apply the same cost of living adjustment methodology used by the state and publish the new thresholds by November 15th each year. Next slide, please. While these current thresholds were appropriate at launch, they no longer reflect the original target income group due to inflation. Indexing maintains fairness and trust in the tax system. Next slide, please. The second update proposes increasing the quarterly estimated payment requirement threshold from $1,000 to $5,000. Raising this threshold addresses a common source of frustration and confusion. Many tax filers unintentionally underpaid, not knowing they were subject to quarterly payment rules. Next slide, please. This change aligns payment rules with material liability and will reduce the administrative burden on many taxpayers with nominal impact on revenue for the program, simplifying tax compliance while reducing inadvertent non-compliance. It will help taxpayers avoid interest charges for minor oversights, impacting an estimated 30,000 filers who will no longer be required to make quarterly estimated payments. And I'll now hand it over to Josh for the remaining slides.
Great. Next slide, please. This has been, as I mentioned, the indexing in particular has been discussed at length with broad business groups, provider groups, community interest groups. We've talked about it at length. I can answer any questions about that, and I'll talk a little bit about the fiscal impact in just a second. As Justin mentioned, really the estimated payments addresses a lot of concerns over the complexity that a lot of taxpayers have had that has resulted mostly in simply penalties and interest payments. These people have otherwise paid fully with the taxes that they owe. We have support for similar reforms in other jurisdictions. Multnomah County, we have been talking to them as we do regularly around these sorts of reforms. Should it pass today, we intend to send them final copies of all of these drafts and encourage them to match our intent in order to, again, just eliminate some confusion from taxpayers, ease of collection. We have the support from the tax administrator over at the city of Portland that we contract with. I have assurances from them that this will not be a big burden for them. It's mostly coding in a computer and making new forms every year, which we have to do anyway for withholding and a variety of other things. Next slide, please. So again, the financial impact. Let's talk a little bit about the estimated payments change. This will not change the amount of revenue we get, except to the extent we don't get penalties and interest that we were getting before. This is a relatively nominal amount. It's very, very small, at less than $100,000. And so what we'll do is change when we receive some of the revenue during the year. It just means that we will not receive some modest estimated payments throughout the year. Instead, there'll be a bigger burden in April. So while the intent is to hopefully diminish complaints, we do recognize that there will be higher burdens on taxpayers in April, potentially, for some of them. So, but they will not be subject to penalties or interest. Next slide, please. Indexing to inflation. So what this is estimated cost is about $4 million in FY 26-27. This is a reduction in collections. This is not really a cost, if we want to think about it that way. Well, it's money we won't see. And so that amount will compound each year annually relative to the current forecast. So the current forecast embeds in it an assumption around increasing numbers of taxpayers. That assumption will go down because of this. We won't have any increasing numbers of taxpayers, and over time that number will increase. And so relative to current forecast, we'll simply, that 4 million will roughly compound every year through the remainder of the program, which is scheduled to sunset in tax year 2030. Next slide, please. So again, just to reiterate what this ordinance achieves, it maintains our focus on high earners. It aligns the policy with the real income levels by doing that. It reduces the compliance burdens, which I think is as big a bonus out of this as we can get. And it demonstrates our responsiveness to taxpayers and to the system as a whole. So with that, Justin and I are both available for any questions.
Awesome. Any questions? Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. First off, I want to really thank you because I think we've been talking almost in circles about these two changes for some time and getting the timing right so that we don't confuse folks about which year we're going to be able to do it in. Landing the plane right about now is pretty great. My hope is that we can be good communicators about this, and you've been really cognizant about how we do the policy on this so that we are good communicators. And to that end, I do have one question because it says that, let me make sure I'm getting this right. Basically, it said in the language that either the administrator or Metro would post, and I would hope that both of us would post.
Councilor Lewis, yes. Functionally, what that means is we post the same documents. And so what we'll do is post them on both websites. That was always the intent. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear.
Okay, wonderful. So yes, as long as we're making sure the same document is posted both places, then I am comfortable. Because some people are outside of Metro, or excuse me, maybe outside of Metro, but outside of Portland and are not naturally going to the Portland website and get very frustrated once they have received an envelope from the city of Portland that maybe they ignore for a little too long, and then they finally open it and then they're told to go to the Portland webpage, and they live in Metro or they understand what Metro is. So as long as we're being good communicators as well, then I'm content.
Thank you, Councilor. We'll do a rest. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilor Rosenthal.
You're muted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, Josh and I have had a little interchange about this. I guess I'm just wondering what ramifications there would be if in Section 7 you changed it to the next lowest $1,000 to be adjusted to the closest $1,000, which then is just basically rounding up or rounding down.
Yeah, Councilor Rosenthal, and I really appreciate. I want to specify this real quick. Sorry, Metro President Peterson. Councilor Rosenthal, I want to first thank you for contacting us ahead of time. That was helpful. I am not aware. I would look to our attorneys of any kind of impact of changing that. However, I think one of the reasons, and I tried to articulate this a little bit, one of the reasons that it rounds down is because in the situation where we might have negative inflation, we're not rounding. We're not taking it down. We're going to leave it flat. So it's just sort of a compromise policy hedge against either of those outcomes. But I'm unaware of any immediate difference or any immediate impacts of changing that to rounding to the nearest thousand. For purposes of discussion, as we move forward every year, we will round every year, but we will calculate it off of the base year. So we're not gonna calculate the next year off of a rounded number. We're gonna keep moving forward off of an unrounded number, if that helps at all to delineate some confusion.
So, so let me just get clear. So if the inflation would peg the number at, say, $125,450, the level of taxation will go down to 124,000, but we would calculate the next year's inflation based upon 124,450.
Yes, Council.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure so that we're not compounding over time. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Councilor Wong.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for bringing this ordinance finally before us. You know, I'm supportive generally, and I was really struck when the salary commission at the City of Portland was looking at what to pay new city councilors, and they arrived at $133,207, which was considered a thriving wage for Portland, which meant that for a family of one and their child, that they could withstand an emergency and be able to not be economically ruined from unexpected circumstances. So I think that moving up the index actually does mirror the intent of voters, where it was supposed to be for high income earners, not just those that can survive a small mishap in their family. I do wonder what the logic was for setting it to inflation starting next tax year rather than the retroactive piece of looking back in past years. I don't know that there would be a substantial difference kind of in revenues generated, but I guess what was the reasoning for starting now rather than retroactively?
Councilor Wong, I would say that when it was suggested to essentially add 5 years of inflation, that was deemed a little bit too. We were going to lose a little too much revenue amongst folks when we were having that discussion, and so this was the compromise position where we ended up. There's not a hard and fast policy rule about what you should and shouldn't do in this situation. This is a 10-year tax as it was implemented, so the inflation part of this is less meaningful than it might be for the PFA, Multnomah County's PFA tax, which is permanent. But we want to recognize that especially because we've had some higher inflation, we want to recognize that this is part of tax policy, is usually indexing to inflation. So I would leave it to others to describe kind of all those ramifications, but this is where we ended up.
Fair enough. I mean, I just want to recognize, we had periods of 8% inflation in the last couple of years, but I understand the compromise being made. Not really a question, but I really, when I hear constituents' complaints, it's often on the quarterly payment system. What will the new system look like then?
It will look exactly the same, but for many, 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 many fewer taxpayers. And so in order to qualify for needing to make estimated payments, a taxpayer or joint tax filer would have to earn roughly $700,000 in successive years, not just 1 year, but successive years. And so those circumstances are relatively small, but they're very important for us to monitor those. In particular, we've talked before about that this is a very concentrated tax at the high end. What this will do is, you can imagine all of those penalties and interest for the people that were between 1,000 and 5,000 estimated payment costs. All of that administrative burden will go away, and we can focus, hopefully, we can have the city focus hopefully more on the taxpayers that are the most cost efficient to actually focus on.
So just selfishly, this will address all the complaints I get every year.
No, never.
Some of
Some of them.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Counselor Nolan,
Thanks, Madam Chair.
or did you have a follow-up? I'm sorry. Okay.
Do we know what the current threshold represents as a percentile of income earners in the region? And then what the chosen inflation method will do to that? If,
Good question, Counselor. So percentile of income earners in the region, when we look at personal income statistics, they're very different from taxable income statistics. The biggest difference is capital gains. It's not in personal income. So I'm hesitant to draw a direct connection between, because of these taxpayers are heavily invested in capital gains. We have a lot of income that comes from that. I'm hesitant to off the cuff address that, but I will take it under advisement and get back to you with a little more detail.
thanks, there are different ways of defining inflation. And I'm pretty sure that inflation or cost of living is different for median income earners than it is for people making $700,000 a year.
Councilor Nolan,
To
absolutely.
maintain a decent standard of living, there's more flexibility among those making $700,000.
Thank you, Counselor. Yes, we all have our own inflation rates.
Right.
All right. Any other questions?
Peterson,
Yes.
if we may, I wanted to go back to an interpretation that, a question that was asked by, I cannot recall which counselor, I apologize, and Counselor Huang, and then answered by Josh. And this concerns the, will we be using sort of one number to inflate from, or will we be using the adjusted number? As I read our ordinance right now, we'd actually be using the adjusted number. And I guess I know we're trying to peg it to the state system. And so I'm going to suggest that my office work with Josh to sort of clarify any ambiguity. And if necessary, have a change proposed for next for next week. I don't think that would arise to the level of being a substantial revision. So it's the kind of clarifying amendment that could be made at adoption. But I think we have a slight difference of opinion in terms of how we interpret the language, and would suggest that we confer to clarify that point. If council wants to weigh in as to the policy outcome that you would like, now would be the time to do so, so that we draft it in the manner that council would like. I just wonder, and Josh, I'm just gonna open this up. It seems maybe challenging over time. I know we don't have a long duration right now planned for this tax. It will expire in 2030 if no subsequent action is taken, but keeping two sets of books or two numbers, I just don't know how that works at the state level. Maybe you can clarify that for council here, and then council can give policy direction if they desire.
No, I appreciate that, Carrie. To the extent that that there is a misnomer, I know that the state does it that way, and that was the intent. So that is the intent, is to, what's our intent was to move forward in the manner that I just described. It's not very difficult at all to keep two numbers. We would do that as a course of action anyway. We would have two separate columns that would operate entirely. This is a relatively, on an administrative burden, the actual technical part of this is very simple. And so, yes, to the extent we need to clarify that, we were happy to do that between now and then.
I guess, so just to be clear, Josh, the state doesn't, the end result of this is we produce a table. And in the background, we would be following essentially the state process, which is to always have our inflation number be from a base that's not adjusted. Is that correct?
Sure, yes.
Is that understood by council, what Josh and I are, okay. Sorry, just, we don't commonly have this back and forth between staff and legal counsel. So I apologize for that, but just wanted to be clear.
And as it currently reads in the ordinance before us today,
it is not clear to me that we are adjusting from that. I'm going to just call it a base number. And so I think we will work to craft either an amendment if necessary, or just put something on the record for legislative history to ensure that we're all on the same page.
Okay. So going forward from today, if we were to have an amendment for the next meeting, there would have to be a third.
That's a very good question, President Peterson, and my answer would be no. This is one where I would say this does not amount to a substantial revision. This is clarifying the intent of the legislation. So there would be no need. You could make such an amendment next week and act in the same meeting.
Thank you. Thanks for that second clarification. Any, Councilor Lewis? And, oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Nolan was first. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay.
Sure. Now that we're having this conversation, I pulled up the ORS, the 316 chapter, that we reference, as where we look to, in our ordinance. And in the ORS, we are utilizing the publication of the Bureau of Labor Statistics by U.S. Department of Labor. And I'm just curious if they are still giving us the statistic we need.
Councilor Lewis, that is a fantastic question. In 2017, they got rid of the Portland index, which might be what you're referencing. There is still that index that's referenced by the state. That is a national index. That is what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is for, one of their functions, frankly. Almost any, put it this way, any income tax that I'm familiar with would index to some BLS measurement.
Okay, great. That's all I needed to know.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. If there's no further discussion or questions, we can move on to the public hearing. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for the work. And while it was not a complete circle, it was probably 310 degrees that got us here. So thank you. All right. I will open a public hearing on ordinance number 25-1531. Georgia, will you please describe to the audience the procedures for the public hearing?
If anyone wishes to testify on ordinance number 25-1531, now is the time to do so. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes. I'll manage a timer to go off at the 3-minute mark. If you have not already signed up to speak, you can do so now. You can testify by raising your hand on Zoom. Depending on your version of Zoom, the raise hand function has its own tab or is located within the reactions tab. Those calling in can raise their hands by dialing *9. If you are here in person, you can bring up a blue card from the back of the room to me and I will call up your name. I'll promote you to a full panelist when it is your turn to testify, and I will call on your name or phone number, and a window will appear asking you to accept being promoted to a panelist. Once you click accept, the Zoom window will close for just a brief moment before you rejoin as a panelist, where you will be able to turn on your camera if you like. You do not need to give your physical address. However, please introduce yourself for the record. And Council President Peterson, I have not received any blue cards or any advanced signups. I'm not seeing anyone come up to the front, and I see no hands raised in the audience.
All right. Seeing no one coming forward, I will close the public hearing on ordinance number 25-1531, and the second reading and consideration of the ordinance is scheduled for Thursday, June 26, 2025. Thank you. And look forward to that clarification. Thank you. Councilors, we'll move on to Chief Operating Officer Communication.
Thank you so much, President Peterson. Just a couple updates today. I wanted to give the GAPD team and the Zoo team and my director team a huge thank you for a super successful city county manager gathering yesterday at the Zoo. We had great attendance. We gave a lot of updates about Metro and also had some time for discussion. Just of note, we did have small group discussion about federal impacts, and there really is a spectrum out in the region from cities who receive no federal funding to jurisdictions that receive quite a bit. So everybody is sort of grappling in their own space, but I think it was great to just be in one place in person together and be able to connect and share, how we're approaching things. We also did get to see Tula too. afterwards. She appeared and was adorable, as usual. Special shout out, we got a tour actually from the ZAP team. So that's our internship program. It's a 3-year program. And we have some amazing interns, one of whom is going to USC in the fall. I'm super proud of her. So shout out there. And then wanted to flag for those of you who haven't gone to, I will be out of office starting this Thursday and returning after the July 4th holiday. I'll be sending an email with all the delegations for your information. But DCO Andrew Scott will be on deck for 1 week, and Craig Stroud, our GM, will be on deck for the other. And then personal point of privilege, I just want to congratulate my daughter, Ava, for graduating from college, summa cum laude on Friday. We're so proud of her. And I cannot believe she's at this point in life. Because I can't be that old. But super proud of her. And thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Nice.
All right, for brags and boasts, money on the table.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I may again, I think I've talked more this meeting than I typically do. I just wanted to, Carrie McLaren, Metro Attorney, 2 parts to mine. First, I will selfishly talk about myself and just make sure that all counselors saw that I also am going to be out of the office through July 4th. And you have an email with the delegated authorities there. So thank you all in advance for what I expect to be a wonderful vacation. The second part is I just wanted to take a quick moment to introduce, every year we do have law clerks in our office to not only help do work for Metro, but to really support the pipeline of growth and development of municipal lawyers. And I wanted to note today that Abby Frazier and Victoria Reiners have joined us. They're sitting right here. Thank you all for, I think, what was a dynamic meeting for them to see sort of local governments in action. We are going to have a kind of a coffee reception for just not only our law clerks, but other law clerks in the region on July 9th from 9:30 to 10:30 before council. You'll all be getting an invitation to that, but I really just thank council for their support on the growth and development of future lawyers. Thank you.
Awesome. Welcome. All right. Counselor communication. Counselor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President. I want to report back this past Saturday, I had an opportunity to do the building dedication at Blue Lake for our new office building. Workers were excited about that piece. I want to thank Jason Lagons, John Blasher, MG Devro, everybody that put hands on that project to make it happen and come to life. And a through line to that, there was the art in the healing space. I got to meet the artists at the Delta Park Powwow this Saturday. So that was also fun. And by the way, Blue Lake has an annual car show. I found that out as well. And it was really, really fun. So
awesome.
That's my updates. Thank you.
Packed Saturday. Councilor Lewis.
Sure, I wanted to share back that last night, the Oregon City Transfer Station Metro Community Enhancement Grant Committee meeting met, and we awarded $321,000 after 10 p.m. To many deserving organizations doing good work in Oregon City, where obviously our Southern Transfer site is. We had about $79,000 that we did not award that were in the budget. And in a very unusual move, we directed staff to bring us back for a second round, not wanting those dollars not to be spent in this moment. So we expect a round 2, both to welcome back some applications that didn't hit the technicalities they needed to, and also hopefully to bring forward some new ideas from the community.
Councilor Rosenthal, do you want to go ahead and mute? Appreciate that. Any other things to share? All right, with that, thank you everyone for a good meeting around a lot of meaty topics. And welcome back, Councilor Nolan, to the table It's nice to see you here. All right, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.